Well, good morning. Thank you, David and worship team and Tiago, for that dramatic presentation from the Old Testament, the story of Samuel, and the story of how God called Samuel, but Samuel couldn't recognize God's voice. Samuel, when he heard God's voice, he thought it was the voice of his teacher. And so his inability to recognize the voice of God kept him from hearing what God had to say to him. But when Samuel finally learned to recognize the voice of God, God gave Samuel the power to be an amazing prophet who anointed King Saul and King David and spoke truth to power in the early days of the kingdom of Israel. Today we're going to hear another call story from the Gospel of John. It's the story of the call of Nathanael. But before I get to that, I want to tell you about how in my life, before I came to know Jesus, I had trouble seeing God and experiencing and knowing God, because I encountered people who put themselves forward in God's name, who distracted me and showed God to be someone that God was not. I remember I went off to college in the fall of 1990, University of Georgia, Athens, Georgia. I drove up there in my purple and red polka-dotted Fleetwood hearse. It was just an amazing time. The music scene in Athens, early 1990, REM, B-52s, amazing music, amazing time. And I moved into the Russell Hall dormitory, which was 11 floors of nothing but freshman boys. And the place was crazy. You had to wear flip-flops in the shower because of broken glass, and They decided the next year to make it co-ed by floor just to cut down on property damage. It was nuts. And there were these guys across the hall from me, and they had a weekly Bible study. And I had grown up a nominal Christian, and I went to one of their Bible studies, and it just didn't resonate with me. It was all about guilt. And it was all about shame, and it was all about fear. And so I sort of distanced myself from these guys, but they persistently, constantly reaching out to me. And what turned me off about them was that they didn't see me as a person. They were witnessing to me, but they were not seeing me. I was just an object of conquest, someone that they might be able to win for the Lord, but they didn't see me. And a little later on campus, this guy came and he called himself Brother Jed. And Brother Jed would go on the college circuit, and he would stand on the free speech platforms, and he would scream at people, "You are all whores and whoremongers. You're going straight to hell." He was awful, just awful. And people were infuriated by him. And again, he was there, he was witnessing to people, but he was not seeing them. And so by the time that I was a sophomore in college, I was asking this question: can anything good come out of Christians? And this is a question similar to the question that Nathanael asked in our gospel reading today. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael, and he said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." And Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" And at this point, Philip had an opportunity to choose how he was going to react. He could have launched into an argument against Nathanael and said, or maybe even attacked him. "You're so shallow. God can come out of anywhere." That's not what he said. He said this. Philip said to him, "Come and see." Philip didn't fight with him. He just said, "Nathanael, come and see." Nathanael was invited to come and see. And then he met Jesus. And when Jesus saw Nathanael coming towards him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you come to know me?" And Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." And this is interesting because all Jesus said to him was, "I saw you under the fig tree." And Nathanael's response was, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." And so we have to ask, why would Nathanael make such a grand declaration after just hearing Jesus say, "I saw you"? And scholars and people throughout the ages have debated and wondered and pondered why. What was such a big deal about Jesus saying, "I saw you under the fig tree"? It's very possible that at one point Nathanael was sitting under the fig tree and Nathanael had an experience of prayer and an encounter with God. Or maybe it was when Nathanael was under that fig tree, he was lonely and he was despondent and he thought no one was there. And Jesus came to him later and said, "I saw you under the fig tree." But whatever it is, we know this. Jesus saw Nathanael, and Nathanael was invited to come and see the one who sees. It's really interesting. There's a story in the book of Genesis about a woman named Hagar. And you can't see Hagar in that picture but there, I've got a laser point. There's Hagar. But Hagar was a slave was enslaved by Abraham. And Abraham and Sarah, of course, couldn't have a child. So Sarah said to Abraham, "Maybe you should have a child by my handmaiden Hagar." And now Hagar is with child, and then Hagar delivers this child. And then, of course, we know the story about Sarah miraculously becoming pregnant, even though she's old. And now Sarah looks at Hagar, and she looks at her with jealousy. She looks at her and she sees Hagar's son Ishmael as a threat to her son Isaac. And she starts to abuse Hagar. And so Hagar runs away out into the wilderness. And I love this painting because it's a landscape. And what you see is vast country and nothing but little Hagar all alone with her child in the wilderness. And there, when she thinks that she's all alone, she has an encounter with God. And God makes a promise to her. And Hagar gives God, who she encounters in the wilderness, a name. She named the Lord who spoke to her. She said, "You are El Roy, the God who sees me." And it is the God who sees me who saw Nathanael. And it is the God who sees me that we see throughout the story of Jesus. We think of the story of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, who did not want to be seen but wanted to see Jesus. So he climbed up in the tree. And Jesus looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, I see you." Or we think of the woman at the well who came to the well in the middle of the day. And this woman who had had and been rejected by 5 husbands and was someone that people didn't want to see. Jesus spoke to her and saw her. And then we think about all the people who were blind and were lame and had leprosy, the people who everyone wanted to ignore. And the story of God who sees, the story of Jesus, is that Jesus saw each one of them, just as he saw Nathanael, just as he sees each of us. Our God is a God and is the God who sees and who loves. But it's interesting, after this encounter, Nathanael was invited to come and see the one who sees so that we would see. And what do I mean by that? Well, Jesus answered Nathanael, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? Y'all," second person plural, "will see greater things than these." And he said to them, "Very truly, I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." He says, "You think it's something special because I saw you." He says, "Follow me." And what you will see is that the gate between heaven and earth is right here. It is close to you. You will see God's action in this world. You may have thought that this world was separate from God and God was far away, but stick around. You will see how close God is. Now, this is a great story, but how does this apply to us as people living here and now? Well, I guess I should tell you that the way in which I became someone who said, "Can anything good come out of Christians?" The way I went from that to being a minister of the gospel was that I encountered people who saw me and they loved me and they said to me, "Come and see." When I started dating Amy, I wasn't a Christian yet, but she brought me home to meet her amazing parents. And I was in this household full of loving people. And then they brought me to their church. And you can tell a lot about a church by the stories that they tell at the church. And they would tell the story about the founding minister, a guy they called Preacher Jim. And they'd tell the story about how they were at summer camp one summer, and Preacher Jim was giving the church camp sermon. And meanwhile, someone went into the restroom and completely fouled the restroom up. Now, the problem is that there's not a janitor around at church camp. Each church rents the facility, and they're responsible for cleaning up the facility afterwards. So after Preacher Jim is done preaching, they discover that the bathroom has been destroyed. And 3 of the staff ministers, they're all arguing, who is going to be the one to clean this up? And they continue to argue and argue until finally they say, wait, where's Preacher Jim? And they walk to the bathroom, and there is Preacher Jim. Having just delivered a sermon, he is now cleaning the bathroom. Humble, wasn't much in the pulpit, but humble servant leadership. And being around strange stories like this, being around people who valued loving and serving one another, not building themselves up, but lifting other people up, made me curious and made me fall in love with the Jesus that they were serving. So let us, by the power of God, let us be people whose lives say to others, come and see. But I also say, by the power of God, let us be people who go and see people. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a city guy. I miss some things about cities. I miss being able to go to the art museum, and I miss theater, and I miss weird city people. I love it down here. What I don't like about the city is that I would call the rule of the city. You see, the rule of the city, anyone who's been in a city long enough, you learn that you're not supposed to necessarily make eye contact with people. And this is hard for me because I love people. I remember with Amy and the kids and I we'd be going downtown to the museum, and Amy would say to me, all right, Chip, what's the rule of the city? And I'd say, don't engage with crazy. And invariably, I'd find myself talking to some street preacher about his interpretation of the end of the world. Don't engage crazy. And I don't like that about the city. I don't like that about the city because each person we encounter is made in the image of God and is a reflection of God. You know, it's interesting. 4 years ago, we took the mission trip to Washington, D.C. And I'm just now realizing how funny that picture is, because this is a picture of a bunch of our youth group kids, and the quotes about drug addicts and homeless people. If any of your kids are in this picture, that's not what I meant. Let me explain. We were there and we were helping people who had no homes in DC. And one of the people who worked with the agency that we were aiding, he said something very interesting. He said, many of these people, they are not homeless because they're drug addicts. They're drug addicts because they are homeless. And you think about that rule of the city where you're not supposed to make eye contact with people. The best way to get where you're going is you just look through them and start walking. And imagine you are a person who lives on the street and you are invisible. No one will make eye contact with you. No one acknowledges your existence. Think how painful that is. We as human creatures, we need to be seen. It is a need deep within our heart. We must be seen. So let us be people who in our lives, the cashier at Publix, the bank teller, the postal carrier, the people we encounter every day, our neighbors, our coworkers, do we see them? People want to be seen. You know, We are coming up on the fourth anniversary of a huge tragedy in the Jupiter community. Just about 6 months after this missions trip, one of our youth group kids, Sean Henry, there was a triple homicide on the evening of Super Bowl Sunday, and his memorial. He was just an amazing kid, and his memorial service was here at Jupiter First Church, and there were easily 900 people at this memorial service, and each person who came up and spoke about their friend Sean Henry said this: he made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He recognized God in other people, and he affirmed it, and he celebrated it. Each person, Sean Henry with his life communicated to each person that he met, you are sacred, you are special. Which brings us to our final point. By the power of God, let us be people who go and see people so that we can see God. Do you want to see the bridge between heaven and earth? Do you want to live life as though our God was not far away and distant and indifferent about this world, but to walk and see God in your life? Then I challenge you to look and seek to see God in each person you meet. Seek to celebrate that each one you encounter is created in the image of God. And an amazing thing will happen then. You will see the image of God in each person, and they will see God through you. And you and I and we will realize that the kingdom of God, the reign of God, is not far away, but it is right here in our midst. Amen.